Chapter 55. The private lounge was really more of an enclosed booth, spacious enough not to feel cramped, but cozy in design. Its center was a broad, circular table, surrounded by a single long, round seat at roughly knee-height and incredibly deeply padded, with a scattering of throw pillows. The room itself was square, so the round bench left a ledge around its perimeter upon which ornamental plants and decorative statues were displayed. Opposite the door, the entire wall was dominated by a window, featuring frosted glass and multiple layers of gauzy white curtains, an arrangement which admitted ample light while obscuring the view. Percy was huddled as close to one corner as she could get on the round bench, still covering her face with both hands. Fenorexa sat beside her, looking worried and uncertain. Shadrach had ensconced himself at the other corner and lounged there as if all this had been arranged for his benefit personally, already reading his book again. Colin slipped into a spot by the door. Rivak had multiple dining customs. He had eaten both in tall chairs and sitting on the floor, and this was about halfway between the two. It was more comfortable than he would have expected. He had only just gotten settled when the thin door was pulled upon from the outside, the heavy curtain within pushed aside, and another young woman glided in, a tray deftly balanced upon her arm. "A fine morning to you," she said, politely ignoring Percy's distressed state, and bent to lay her tray in the center of the table. "Please enjoy this chilled water, delicately flavored with cucumber and lime, to soothe away both heat and fatigue whilst you settle in and decide upon your order. The house's specialties are listed in these menus, but the Rose is able to accommodate many additional desires, should you have special requests. The chef prides herself upon versatility." "No need," said Shadrach, looking up with a smirk. "I'll just have—" "You're about to ask for the most expensive thing on the menu," Colin interrupted, "because the thought of wasting my money amuses you." "My money, Shadrach, is all inherited, from someone whose very memory I despise, and I have more of it than a person could conceivably spend in a lifetime. It means nothing to me. Instead of squandering this opportunity trying and failing to be a prick, why not just order something you will actually like? I have an idea of about how often you get the opportunity to dine on anything of this quality." Shadrach stared at him in grim, pointed silence for 2 slow seconds, then snatched up a menu and commenced scowling at it. "I shall return in a few minutes," their server said with a discreet smile, ignoring the byplay, "to hear your needs. Please do not feel rushed, honored guests. You may order whensoever it suits you." Bowing, she retreated, gently closing the door behind her with a muffled click. "Are you feeling any better?" Fenorexa asked hesitantly. Mortified, Percy mumbled through her hands. "It's okay, nobody blames you," the dragon assured her. "It was just by you," Percy exclaimed, finally lowering her hands. She was still flushed bright pink, but scowling in anger. "I mean, by me and by you. Do you know how humiliating it is to be picked up and hauled around like luggage? I was not incapacitated. I just needed a little space. You know that. Shadrach already provided it. Shadrach was more helpful than you." "Situation normal," Shadrach commented without looking up. "I'm sorry." Fenorexa looked crushed. Colin was fighting all his instincts, which wanted him to jump in here and reassure everybody. Fortunately he had other, more developed instincts, warning him that they needed to work this out. Maybe with a little light help, but it would be a mistake for him to step in and try to fix it. "I didn't mean to embarrass you. I was worried, Percy. After the last time, I didn't know what to do." At that, he had to interject. "Last time? I don't remember that. Do you mean when she first arrived?" Percy covered her face again. "No. It was in the old city," Fenorexa answered, still watching Percy. "After you left. She seemed fine and then she just crumpled, and I didn't know how to help." The princess heaved a deep sigh, grudgingly lowering her hands again. She still stared down at the table, refusing to meet anyone's eye. "I'm sorry, Phenorexa. I shouldn't have snapped at you. I know you were trying to help. It's not your fault you didn't know what to do, it's mine. I should have explained ahead of time. Or, last time. Yep, said Shadrach, still perusing the menu. I hate talking about it, Percy whispered. I hate being a burden. At home, everyone understands. They've dealt with me for years, they know what to do. I was so hoping. I was trying to be better. You're not a burden, Phenorexa insisted. Yes, I am. Everyone says that. It's automatic, it's a platitude, and it's not true. I can't do anything, I'm not fit to be provided for, all I do is live on other people's charity and contribute nothing. I hate it. Nah, you're just spoiled, said Shadrach. Everyone, including Percy, turned venomous glares on him, and he finally looked up, continuing before Colin or Phenorexa could lay into him. I mean, your family didn't do you any favors by keeping you locked away. If you'd been born in a poor family, you'd have had to work. If your folks didn't have the luxury of keeping a mouth to be fed that wasn't attached to a working pair of hands, they'd have had to pound it into you. That way you'd probably have ended up with a lot more trauma and hang-ups, but you'd be able to cope better. There's a trade-off for everything. It's hard to say that would have been better, just different. Wow, that was almost helpful, Phenorexa said. I don't want to press you, Percy, Colin said quietly. It would be helpful if we knew how to help you, though. She sighed again, once more staring at the table. Well, you saw. Sometimes things get to be too much. Anything that's new, or a lot at once. I get overwhelmed. It's unpredictable when and how. Sometimes it doesn't hit me like that until a while later. Sometimes I can stop it if I feel it coming in time, and can go be by myself in familiar surroundings. That's not even the worst of it, that doesn't actually happen very often. I'm bad at people. You're not missing anything. Just shut up, Shadrach, Phenorexa exclaimed. I don't understand what people are trying to communicate most of the time, Percy said quietly. She looked and sounded so depressed Colin had an urge to sidle over there and hug her, but of course he maintained space. I understand language just fine. It took me the longest time to figure out that that's barely half of communication. There are all these nuances. Facial expression and body language and cultural norms and there's so much, and I don't get it. People my family have tried to teach me. Mum and friends have actually managed to help a bit, but they were figuring it out as they went because apparently even they don't know how they know, at least not well enough to explain it in words. It's just instinct for everyone but me. Percy absently lifted her hands above the edge of the table, and Colin noticed for the first time that she was rapidly rubbing her thumbs across the fingertips in a complex sequence of taps that was almost too fast to follow. Seeming to belatedly realize this herself, she balled her hands into fists and stuffed them back into her lap. A princess is to be good at these things. The job is entirely social. Royalty are meant to be of service to their nation. That is the only point and the only use of royalty. Mother is firm and extremely clear about this. My family care about me a lot. I have never felt unloved, but you can't have a princess who just lurks in her rooms and isn't any good to anyone. All I do is live off tax revenue and contribute nothing and cause problems. My family and my country are better off without me. Venomax did them a favor. A big favor, swooping in before anything happened that made them decide it was necessary to get rid of me. I know it would have come to that eventually. It would have hurt them far worse, but Mother does not shirk from painful duty or allow anyone else to. It's lucky this happened. It's better this way. I'm sorry to be your problem, now. Shadrach was ostentatiously absorbed in the menu. Phenorexa looked almost as plaintive as Percy, helpless, unsure what to do, and hating it. The young dragon shot him a pleading look across the table. You should talk to Iziroa, Colin suggested. Percy looked up, frowning at him. About what? A soft rap sounded against the outer door. After a second's pause, it was pulled open, and then the curtain pushed aside to reveal their waitress, who bowed. Do forgive the interruption, honored guests. I am ready to be of service, unless you wish me to return later. Colin winced. Shadrach was the only one of them who'd even looked at a menu. It was he who spoke first. Lamb biryani, medium spice, the mage said curtly, tossing his menu back down on the tray next to the still untouched water. He means lamb biryani, please, said Colin. I have never meant that, in my life, to anyone. You do here and now. You can be as much of an ass to me as you want, but I'll have my wife bite off your legs before I'll let you abuse service people on my coin. Which one? Shadrach asked, smirking. Both legs, Shadrach. Forgive me if this is an odd request, Colin continued, turning back to the waitress with a smile, but I'm a traveler from Rivak who doesn't know enough about Masari cuisine to order intelligently. All I know is that I love having new experiences. Based on my experiences in the marketplace, I'm comfortable with what seems an average level of spicing in Shamasar, so if it's not too much trouble, I would like to request whatever the chef would recommend to an inexperienced but adventurous newcomer. Ah. Good sir, I most ardently assure you it is the opposite of trouble, the waitress replied with a deep bow and a pleased smile. In fact, hearing this shall absolutely make the chef's day. She will take this as a sacred charge, and ensure you the ultimate welcome to the fair shores of Shamasar. Well, in that case, I'll have what he's having, said Phanorexa. She'll have it a bit less spicy, Colin added. Now, see here. Phanorexa, to dine on high-quality food is an experience, and I would greatly regret seeing you miss out on the proper enjoyment of it for the sake of making some kind of absurd point. You should get something that will make you happy, not that will make Shadrach stop making fun of you. Nothing will accomplish that, anyway. Yes, well, I suppose it's an unbeatable argument, she said sourly. Very well. I will amend my request with the proviso that I have a somewhat more delicate palate than the Riva, here. In the grand bounty of Masari cuisine, there exist a cornucopia of flavors both intense and mild, replied the waitress. Our chef shall be delighted in the extreme by the opportunity to introduce honored guests to its full scope. I don't know what any of this even is, Percy said glumly, staring at the menu she had picked up during the preceding exchange. I'm sorry. I also don't know what to order, but I'm not as adventurous as my friends. Do pardon me if I presume, good lady, but does that happen to be a Mitson accent I detect? Percy looked up at her, blinking in surprise. Oh. No, Verity. That was really close, though. Ah, do forgive me, the verbals are an intricate place, and at this distance I fear the nuances are over my head. Shemavad is blessed to sit at an intersection of trade routes, and the rose prides itself on offering a taste of home to many a far-flung traveler. Do you happen to like pierogi? Percy sat bolt upright. I do. You can do that? The chef can do many things, good lady. Her sausage and cabbage pierogi happen to be a particular specialty, however, which she is always pleased to have an opportunity to create. If you wish to join your friends in trusting her expertise, she can also produce an array of traditional side dishes. And, if you will further accept her recommendation for dessert, the Rose is blessed to have a quantity of Verity honey in storage, from which I am sure she would be ecstatic to craft a delicacy for such a discerning palate. That would be wonderful. Percy looked almost on the urge of tearing up. Then so it shall be. Deftly gathering up their menus without disturbing the carafe of water and still untouched glasses, the waitress bowed and backed up through the door. Do please take your leisure, honored guests. A feast befitting your most admirable taste shall be under way for you in moments. We must not rush perfection, and less than perfection the Rose will not deign to serve. The curtain swished shut again, the door clicked, and they were once more in private. Verity honey has to be stupid expensive in a place like this, Shadrach commented. What's it to you? Fanorexa snipped. You're wearing a translation pendant and speaking Felvelin, Shadrach added in a more contemplative tone. The fact that she was able to even hear your accent is uncommonly impressive. That kind of attention to detail is something diplomats and spies develop, not waitresses. This is obviously an expensive restaurant, said Colin. People who make their living catering to the rich and powerful have to be a lot sharper than they're given credit for. It's a point worth keeping in mind. We should probably be careful. Speaking of, Fanorexa, thanks for shielding us from eavesdropping all day. She scowled. I have to say, it's a little unnerving that you're aware of that. Everybody has their talents, he replied with a wink. Like, for example, at the Royal Archives we have a couple of what are called variant stations. One used to be one of my favorite places to visit. It was set up so the clerks are worked in a kind of semi-open enclosure right at the intersection of 6 of the major hallways in the archives. It was a high-traffic area, people were always coming through, and it was also designed to be purposely distracting. Stained glass that made different patterns on the floor as the sun moved, hanging chimes that would go off with every little breeze, and they had a different kind of incense burning each day. That sounds like a nightmare, Percy said, aghast. For me, too, Colin agreed, grinning. Well, no, not that I wouldn't like it, I just wouldn't get anything done, working there. Too many people to stop and chit-chat with. In fact, the Lord Scribe eventually banned me from visiting them during my working hours, which, yeah, that was reasonable. But that's what made it a variant station, you see. There are some folks who aren't able to concentrate properly unless they have constant stimulation and distraction. Isaiah put together programs to make accommodations for people with mental variants like that, so most government offices have at least a couple. The other one in the archives was just the opposite, often the very quietest back hallways, everything strictly routine and quiet and controlled. The people working in there were not to be disturbed. You could get in big trouble for bothering them unnecessarily. Mental variants? Percy asked, staring at him fixedly. So, back when Isaiah was putting together Rivax Hospital and University systems, one of her scholars had a breakthrough in treating madness with magic. That was previously considered unreliable, verging on impossible, but he designed spell formulae to treat mental illnesses by targeting the abnormalities in the brain that caused them. Here's the thing, though, once that method was known, and scholars began working to expand it, they kept hitting dead ends. A lot of conditions responded well to it, but a lot didn't. Healing magic works by, well, at a basic level it is to start by distinguishing good from bad, by knowing the body's base state and remedying alterations to it. There are some mental conditions that exist across most sapient populations which aren't treatable this way. Because, for purposes of healing magic, they aren't illnesses. They aren't wrong. Those people aren't insane, they are supposed to be like that. She was staring fixedly at him, silent and even more wide-eyed than usual. Fanorexa was watching Percy. It was likely she'd read about at least some of this previously. Shadrach had his book out again and was pretending to ignore them. The breakthrough happened, Colin continued, when Isaiah herself had the idea to try accommodating these kinds of mental variations rather than regarding them as aberrant. She gathered up some specialists and set them to cataloging as many of these conditions as they could, and figuring out as much of their needs as was possible. Then designed recommendations to accommodate them. And that worked. There are people whose minds are a little different. It's not that they're insane, they just aren't built to work within certain cultural frameworks. Oh, yeah, this kind of thing tends to be culturally dependent, too. So she made programs to provide employment for them in government offices. Isaiah hates wasting talent. How? How many of these variants are there? Percy asked tremulously. I'm afraid I don't exactly know, Colin admitted. It's one of those things I kept meaning to study up on, but there's always so much to study and only so many hours in the day. Fanorexa nodded sagely. But that's why I suggested talking to Izaroa, he continued. She definitely knows a lot more about this than I do. Percy, I can tell just from talking with you over the last week that you're not stupid or crazy. I'm willing to bet that whatever issue you're having, it's something along these lines. Izaroa would probably recognize it and have ideas about ways to help you get along, if you described it to her. I promise you that wouldn't be an imposition. She feels responsible for how Vanamax treated you. I think she'd be really glad of the opportunity to do something good for you beyond just providing hospitality. Why? Percy whispered. Why is this the first time I've ever heard about any of this? 'Cause Boisvard isn't much of a country, Shadrach grunted. Rivak is always beyond the cutting edge of social programs because its incredibly powerful immortal empress likes to use parts of it as laboratories to run huge social experiments and figure out stuff like this. Most countries don't have the resources to follow along, and a lot of cultures find the entire business terrifyingly creepy. A subject about which Shadrach is completely neutral, as you can see, Fenorex added. It's nothing that needs to be solved right now, or can be, said Colin, finally pouring a glass of cucumber lime water and pushing it across the table to Percy. There will be plenty of time to talk with Izaroa once we're back. The job before us right now is to relax, rest, and have what will probably be the best lunch any of us can remember. It was, for all of them except apparently Shadrach, whom Colin ignored on the grounds that he would probably never admit to enjoying anything. After an early, locally, for them it was closer to dinner and magnificent lunch, they resumed Percy's shopping at a more sedate pace, by unspoken consensus taking frequent, aimless detours from the busy market streets to window shop along the sleepier districts beyond. Returning to Madame Ludinsky's to pick up the altered dresses was the last errand of the day, undertaken just as the afternoon reached its zenith, by which time Percy was visibly uncomfortable in the tropical heat. Upon returning to the customs office, they were greeted politely by the same commissioner as before, who had been on duty before dawn, and whom Colin hoped they hadn't kept at his post the entire day, but very much feared that was exactly what had happened. Well, at least this trip had been educational. Dragons could pass for dragonborn among random adventurers, but evidently not in any circumstance in which mages would be inspecting them closely. Had he known what kind of intake procedures Shamasar had for teleporters, he would never have suggested coming here. The commissioner informed them diffidently that departing the country via teleportation didn't require the same controlled measures as entering it, but that he nonetheless appreciated their diligence in letting him know they were leaving. Minutes later, they were back in the foyer area of Shadrach's tower. It was after dark in Dragonvale, and Percy was struggling to repress her increasingly huge yawns. While the dragon and the princess stepped outside, Colin lingered to settle up accounts with their transportation. "Hey, Zelakur," Shadrach said suddenly, holding his new Illuvine lenses. "Did Atraximos have any more pairs of these in his hoard?" "What, you want to do business, now?" "Well, I wasn't planning any more excursions, but if something comes up." "I meant for the girl," the mage said irritably. "I used to know a guy who got fits similar to that." He described it as too much information coming in. More data than his mind could process at once, so it would build up in a backlog until it turned into emotion and overwhelmed him. He wagged the black glasses at Colin. "These work by helping the mind process things it normally can't. They provide a kind of buffer, so dangerous input doesn't actually affect the brain." Do you? Would that actually work?" He shrugged. "I've never heard of them being used for that, but logically, it's at least possible. In the worst case, it can't hurt to try. These are protective gear, the very definition of safe." She couldn't even break the lenses and cut herself. "Thank you, Shadrach," Colin said, smiling. "Now I guess I'd better get out of here, before you go revealing any more of your soft, gooey center. I have a terrible premonition this isn't the last time we're going to meet," the mage growled, which forewarns me that at some point I'm going to end up dropping you through a hole into someplace dark and nonlinear until you learn to keep that yap of yours shut. Goodbye, Zeliker. Colin was still grinning as he stepped outside and the door slammed behind him. Phenorexa had already assumed her larger form and was clinging to the side of the mountain with Percy astride her neck. With a simple exertion of will, he flashed across the space between to join her. "That is a very neat trick," Percy observed. "I wish I could do that. Climbing up here was quite uncomfortable. It would be extremely helpful if I could get on top of Phenorexa at will." The dragon twitched beneath them. Colin would have given a lot to see her face in that moment, but she had her head turned stubbornly forward out of their view, and he decided to be merciful. "All right, ladies, today was a good trip. We had fun and got stuff done, altogether a successful outing. Now let's go home." Chapter 56. The world flickered, and he was in a different place. A similar place. This teleport pad had been built according to the same standardized design as his own, right down to the panels of stonework high in the walls which he knew were concealed windows from which he was no doubt being watched. There were more guards, though, both soldiers and battle mages, and a formal greeting party awaiting him in front of the entry corridor. "We have arrived," declared the portal mage who'd brought him. Perhaps unnecessarily, but Modine appreciated formality. "Thank you," he said, turning to the man and bowing, then stepped forward to greet those who had come to welcome him. This was almost overwhelming. He had to draw upon his reserves of poise, finding himself unexpectedly in the presence of royalty. Though she wore no diadem at the moment, being dressed only in a sovereignty military uniform, the dragonborn who stepped forward revealed her parentage by her coloring. Her scales and horns were that distinctive, shimmering bronze, her eyes a vivid crimson. She wore her coppery hair in a long braid, per army regulation. Beyond that, Modine didn't know which this one was, save that her mother was apparently Masari to judge by her skin tone. He had only been granted an audience with the sovereign once. It wasn't as if he was personally familiar with the royal family. "Commissioner Modine," she said, saluting in the military fashion. "Welcome, and thank you for attending us so swiftly. My father is quite taken with your work in Shemavat. It's an honor to finally meet you. I am Nashma." That threatened to leave him actually tongue-tied for a moment, but Modine managed to recover himself with a bow and a reply. "Of course, Princess Nashma. Surely the honor is entirely mine." She smiled, beckoning him forward, and fell easily into step alongside him as he obeyed. "Is it, though? Any fool can be born royal. I happen to know a few fools who were. To achieve rank purely through merit, through talent and industriousness, that is praiseworthy. It is on citizens like you that the sovereignty depends." "I don't necessarily disagree, of course. I know well the sovereign's position on meritocracy. But there is no citizen who doesn't know whom we have to thank for our prosperity. Forgive me, it was thoughtless of me to put you in that position." Her smile was reassuring. Nashma was reputed to be down-to-earth, and popular among her troops. Having to argue about who's more worthy with a member of the royal family, what a sticky predicament. "I'm a woman of action more than words, Commissioner. I wasn't trying to trap you. Suffice it to say that your contributions to the sovereignty are known and appreciated here." "Thank you. I hope to make many more." "I feel certain that you will." He hadn't come here by portal mage last time, and thus did not realize how close the platform was to the throne room. Modine was just following Nashma and her honor guard with no real idea where he was or where they were going, until after a very short journey they emerged into a space he recognized. It was here, in the vast octagonal throne room, that he had had his previous audience with Savasmitter. That had been a public occasion, though. Now the cathedral-like space was dimmer, lit by hanging lamps in the last dusky glow of sunset through its towering windows. It was much less crowded, as well, with only royal guards securing its entrances apart from the group at the base of the throne itself. That throne was a huge dais, not a chair, as the sovereign preferred to conduct state business in his greater form. As Nashma led him directly across the huge space, Modine took note of two other dragonborn with bronze scales standing by the throne, and a small knot of well-dressed individuals nearby. So, only family and trusted advisors were here for this meeting. Even as he noted this, of course, his perception was preoccupied with the colossal, beautiful form of the dragon. Monarch Modine, Sovereign Savas Mitter greeted him with a courteous lip of his head, his mellifluous voice seeming to resonate through the air and the very stone of the chamber. We meet again. I am pleased to see that you continue to thrive. Welcome, and please accept my earnest apologies for so peremptorily summoning you here at this hour. He seemed to glow even more brilliantly in a lower light than when Modine had previously seen him, when the full sun illuminated the throne room. Savas Mitter's scales were bronze in color, but each in two subtly differing shades, so that rather than being all one tone like a bronze sculpture he glittered and scintillated with every tiny movement. Something about the lamplight seemed to magnify the effect. The overall tint drifted across his body, too, from a deep almost red along his spine to a nearly golden shade at the belly, with jagged striations of black weaving across his back just behind the wings. Before he had decided to try his giant hand at governance, Savas Mitter had been known chiefly as one of the world's most beautiful dragons. Doing his best not to be dazzled at the expense of dignity, Modine knelt before him as soon as he had drawn close enough to converse. No apology is necessary, my sovereign, ever. I am your servant to direct as you see fit. I appreciate your diligence, Commissioner Modine. Please, rise. My citizens are not pieces to be tossed about on a board, however. I regret bringing you so far at this hour on a day in which you have undoubtedly already been more busy than most, particularly when I fear the concern which has prompted me to summon you may be an overreaction. When we have finished, I will gladly offer you the hospitality of my home, unless you would prefer to return immediately to Shemavat. You need not rush to decide. I thank you for the consideration, my lord, Modine said, inclining his head again now that he was back upright. How may I serve? Nashma had stepped over to join her two siblings, a young man lounging indolently against the base of the dais who seemed to have a different mother, and another princess who resembled Nashma to an uncanny degree, save that her hair hung loose and she wore an embroidered sari rather than military uniform. The others in attendance, mostly Masari humans with one of the local Karnet elves among them, remained silent and watchful. Apparently this conversation was to be between him and the dragon alone. Commissioner Dassault is being promoted to minister, the sovereign stated, Crimson eyes watching him closely. He will be transferring to a position here in the capital. In light of your startlingly successful reorganization of your department, I have decided to assign you his previous position as Commissioner of the entire Customs Office of Shemavat. Modine's breath caught. Thank you, my sovereign. Congratulations, Commissioner. As I continue to explain, it will become clear that the timing of this has been prompted by events outside our expectations. I wish to reassure you, first, that only the timing is thus influenced. This is the logical action, made so by your established competence. Already your reforms have been used to model improvements in other offices, though with somewhat lesser results in each. Once you have had time to settle into your new role, I intend to begin assigning you secretaries whom I would like you to train in your methods, that they may be transferred to other posts and hopefully introduce similarly successful reforms. He was practically vibrating in place now, his weariness from the long day faded like a dream. I understand, Sovereign. I shall see it done. I may request a period of introduction in which to familiarize myself with command of the overall office before I will have sufficient attention to give to management trainees. Communicate with your superiors in the barter ministry. I will make it known that you are to have what you require. And now, to the matter which has prompted this presumptuous summoning. As I suspect you already anticipate, I wish to ask you about the extremely interesting visitors who passed through your checkpoint this morning. Ah, yes. Indeed, he had seen this coming as soon as the summons had reached him. The dragon Fenurixa and her associates. Everything I have been able to determine was in my report, Sovereign. Of course I stand ready to answer anything you wish to know, but I fear I may have nothing more of use to tell you. That is why I feel remorse for bringing you here so abruptly, Commissioner Martin, and because in the likeliest outcome, it is nothing which could not wait. The possibility of a crisis requiring immediate action is very remote. Given the potential stakes in such an unlikely event, however, I chose to err on the side of caution. For this rough handling, again, you have my apology. Martin bowed his head once more. I am always honored to be of service. What would you ask of me, my sovereign? That which is not contained in reports crafted according to procedures I have carefully implemented to emphasize dry factuality. This I have done for good reason, and been satisfied with the results. There come times, however, when I believe a more personal perspective is better. That is what I would ask of you, Commissioner. As an experienced professional, as someone who has encountered many people and learned to anticipate and address their needs. What were your impressions? Your personal observations? I see. Martin spoke slowly, buying seconds which he spent rapidly gathering his thoughts. This was not what he had expected. It was almost disorienting, that the sovereign seemed to think so highly of his insight. Very well. I spoke with them only briefly myself, but, upon reading the reports of the silent service who followed before all day, I found that they added depth and context to my initial impressions, rather than contradicting them. Such intuitions are precisely why the personal insights of experienced professionals are of value, Savasmitter said. Please, continue. Initially, my assumption was that the dragon Fenurexa was naturally in charge of the group. This was challenged when that man, Konzelakur, appeared to have authority over her. At least, she accepted a harsh rebuke from him, seemingly without offense. About that point, I remain uncertain after studying the Watcher's accounts. They spoke of several points at which he seemed to exert authority over the group, but for the most part appeared to play the role of mediator. That might fit my initial impression that Fenurexa employed him for that purpose. Or he might have been the dominant individual in the group, but favors peacemaking and manipulation as a leadership strategy. Such a method is not to my own tastes, but I have seen it used before. The dragon nodded. You did read the report of the conservatory which you identified what Konzelakur is. Yes, my sovereign. I am embarrassed to admit I had to ask my office's Maj Lieutenant to explain what a godling is. Even she had never seen one. There is no shame in that, Savasmitter assured him with a smile. Godlings are an exceedingly rare phenomenon, of relevance only to some very particular specialties among scholars and the priesthood. I myself was aware of them only due to my age. In the great fullness of time, one tends to encounter even the most remote of happenstance. But please, I am interrupting. Do continue, Commissioner. Yes, my sovereign. The relationship I just described was the focus of my own curiosity, mostly because I am uncertain how to parse it. Fenurexa is likely a very young dragon, as none of the offices I consulted were aware of the name, and I am given to understand it is impossible to know exactly what powers a godling may have. It is difficult to imagine him suborning a dragon, however, any dragon. And most tellingly, their interactions suggested friendship. It may not be a matter of dominance between them. At least, I can't conceive any dragon, no matter how young, would take being coerced into service with anything but bitter, violent resistance. Savasmitter nodded. As, in unison, did all three of his dragonborn children, the princesses solemnly, their brother with a smirk. That, in fact, appears to summarize the nature of the group. They are friends. An eclectic batch, perhaps, but bonded by companionship. The likely exception is the portalmage, Shadrach, who appears to have been hired as transportation and held himself somewhat aloof from the group. It is notable that the rest appeared to take his very acerbic attitude in stride. He is more distant from them, but seemingly regarded with some fondness. And the primary pair seemed fond and protective of that rather timid Valafolk girl, Percy. In a relationship that seemed mutual. She was repeatedly seen turning to one or the other of them for comfort or protection when startled by something new in the marketplace, including once on the platform under my own eyes. He hesitated, thinking carefully, and nodded. That, I think, was the essence of it. They reminded me of a party of adventurers, or a group of school friends, or perhaps army trainees. 3 of them were clearly very exceptional individuals. Other than that, I would see nothing untoward about the group. Just kids on a shopping trip. Martin paused again, frowning as he scraped his brain. That is my impression, my sovereign. I don't think I can add anything else of note. If you have more specific questions, I will of course answer to the best of my ability. Savasmitter turned his head to regard the knot of nearby advisors, several of whom bowed in reply. He looked then at his children. Nashma remained impassively at attention while her sister nodded to him and the prince shrugged, flicking his claws. "Thank you, Commissioner Martin," the sovereign said at last. "Again, I regret dragging you all this way for such a prosaic purpose, but it has solidified my thoughts on the matter as I hoped. The account you give matches both my own interpretation of these reports, and the analysis of my counselors. It remedies my unease to hear it validated by a man of established good judgment who saw this group firsthand. It is my honor to be of service, my sovereign, in any small way. No apology is necessary." "There is more I wish to tell you about this matter," the dragon continued gravely. "First, though this news is too fresh to have become widely known, and may never be a matter of interest this far away, it is known to my intelligence gatherers that approximately a week ago, the Princess of Boisvert, the Averval kingdom in which Atraximos has his roost, was abducted by a dragon. Her name is Perseverance." Martin's eyes widened as he took in the implications. The sovereign watched his expression closely as he continued. "One version of accounts claims she was taken by Atraximos himself. I do not believe this. Atraximos is a contemptible beast and a disgrace to our shared kind. The only use he has ever had for mortals is the disgusting pleasure he takes in their suffering. One of the young drakes still residing in his nest is said to be a red dragon, however. That seems to me more likely to be the reason for this misinterpretation. Another interesting fact which did not make it as far as the reports given you was that she was, in fact, wearing a magical artifact which slipped through the customs scans, a dragon scale anklet charmed to provide a measure of protection against dragon attack, or draconic notice." Martin winced. "Ah. I apologize profusely for that oversight, There is no need, Commissioner," Savasmitter assured him. "Its caliber was within the tolerances we expect to slip through customs from time to time. Aside from her, the portal mage we have not yet identified, but I have people working on that. A description and first name should be sufficient. It is exceptional for an individual so young to be that powerful. There will be records of him somewhere in Rivak. I am less confident about the most interesting member of the party, as Coln is evidently a common enough even name. But we shall see what can be seen." The dragon shifted on his perch, flexing his claws. "Obviously, something unprecedented and exceedingly interesting is transpiring in Dragonvale, and, to a lesser extent, in Boisvert and Rivak. From this glimpse we can barely begin to speculate as to the true shape of events, which it would probably be a mistake to do. My analysis, and that of my advisors, is that Shamasar's role in this is done. Whatever the children of Atraximos are scheming, it appears most likely that they came here to fulfill their needs specifically because Shamasar is so distant from and not connected to their business. It is apparent from their activities that the purpose of their trip was to gather what a young lady of good breeding would need to live in comfort. We shall learn as much as we can of this situation from this distance without exacerbating it, but as things stand, it does seem that no threat to the sovereignty exists." Martin nodded. "I am relieved by that analysis, my sovereign." "Unless," the dragon rumbled, "I choose to involve myself." Nashma remained outwardly serene, while both of her siblings grimaced. The nearby advisors huddled together, a few whispering. Martin remained as firmly composed as he physically could. "My first responsibility," it goes without saying, is to my people. I will do nothing to imperil their interests. Among the intriguing and disturbing possibilities suggested by the little we have been able to glimpse, between the involvement of the Traximos and the presence of Riva, there are two indications that these events may come to affect Isaroa herself. Modine blinked. Is she connected to a Traximos, my Lord Sovereign? That is not common knowledge, Savasmitter rumbled, and I advise you not to repeat it. You will face no retribution from me, Commissioner Modine, but not for no reason is it proverbially unwise to meddle in the affairs of dragons. But yes, while the specific nature needn't concern you, Isaroa has an arrangement with the Traximos which protects Rivak. That much was, though not known, so widely speculated that even historians took it as given. There seemed no other obvious explanation why the Dread would refrain from pillaging a human empire so close to his own range. Savasmitter, moving slowly so as not to alarm the mortals before him, drew himself upright, raising his neck to the full, towering height which made apparent the reason this throne chamber was of such enormous proportions. That which I know of governance I have refined through practice, but learned originally by studying the writings of Empress Isaroa. From following her example has come great prosperity. Shamasar owes her a debt, as do all nations upon this world, whether they know it or acknowledge it or not. From her long centuries of experimentation has come a source of wisdom in the art of civic administration which has no peer in all of history. Every person in every kingdom who lives in a more enlightened system than squalid medieval oligarchy owes at least a percentage of their security to the Golden Empress. Shamasar stands proud because Rivak laboriously stood up from the muck, and showed us all the means to do so. Yes, my sovereign. Modine burst out when he paused, uncharacteristically unable to contain himself. The fervor in Savasmitter's voice was just so infectious, particularly to someone who already agreed with his argument. All her writings are of crucial importance, but Isaroa's third treatise on management is my scripture. I do not fancy myself an innovator. Whatever I have achieved, I've done by implementing the wisdom laid down by you and by the Golden Empress. The dragon before him smiled, clearly pleased. Ah, I thought I discerned the shadow of her hand in the work for which I previously acknowledged you, Commissioner. And thus, you see my dilemma. As head of state, I have but one duty, and it does not indicate a need to step anywhere near this business. As a person with a sense of honor, who knows whereof springs every happiness I have been able to create for my people, that becomes more complicated. The state has neither friends nor morals, Modine quoted from Isaroa's own writings, only interests. And yet, high among its interests is the need to maintain the aspect of friendship and morality. A person who has only interests without principles is the worst of scoundrels, Savasmitter continued, baring his terrifying teeth in an approving smile, and a nation which composes itself of such souls is doomed. Thus, the cold machinery of governance must maintain in the hearts of its citizens all the virtues that it cannot afford to retain for itself. Yes. I did think you would understand, Commissioner Modine. What is your will, my sovereign? How can I help? You see, now, why I have done these things in this manner, why I expedited the promotion which you had already earned, and brought you here to verify your good judgment with regard to this matter in particular. Again, it may well be that nothing will happen, that I will have achieved nothing save to set the right person in the right place to improve my citizens' lives, in which case it will still have been a good day's work. But it may also be that our peculiar friends will revisit us. If they are up to no good they will most likely take a different entry, but if their intentions toward Shamus are truly or innocent, it is probable they will prefer the safe, established route. I charge you, Commissioner Modine, with keeping a discreet watch for this among your other duties. Make arrangements such that if this group ever crosses your threshold again you will be informed, and can move quickly to alert me and then observe them closely. You are not to interfere with them unless they break the law or present a threat to the people. Otherwise, learn all that can be learned. I understand, my sovereign. I will do everything in my power. Savasmitter dipped his neck deeply to nod at him. acknowledging the likelihood that, as I have said, nothing further will happen with regard to us. I have nonetheless taken steps to ensure we continue to observe and gather what information we can about this business. I will invest such resources as I can afford to prioritize gaining this information without imperiling Shamasar's interests. There exists, amid the probabilities, a thread of possibility that must be considered, a chain of ifs which I cannot afford to ignore. If it should prove that Empress Izaroa faces some peril as a result of this, if it is possible for me to come to her aid, and if this can be done without endangering the citizens who are always my primary concern, I cannot in conscience abandon her. Whether she knows it or not, this nation owes her too much. Mahdi knelt before him again, bowing his head. I understand, my sovereign. I shall pray that these efforts come to naught, but if it transpires that we may help the Golden Empress, you can count on every aid of which I am capable, however humble it is. I thank you, the sovereign said solemnly. Truly, Mondar Madin, you are among my most appreciated servants. The Dragonborn Prince heaved an exasperated sigh. Chapter 57. Good morning, Commander, Colin said to the empty air as soon as he'd stepped outside the corridor from his chamber into the great central vault. With the usual flow of luminous mist coalescing out of thin air, the ghostly commander of the Phantom Legion materialized at attention before him, saluting. Anything to report? The commander saluted again. Colin had learned that no news was good news. If there actually was something the ghost needed to communicate, he would hold up his report book and Colin would have to get Fanorexa to translate. He had found primers on the Darashi language in Amar Alafin's library, but was still in the process of memorizing the alphabet. Very good. How's morale? The commander saluted. Okay. I realize this is an unconventional deployment, but make sure to let me know if there's anything your people need. The commander saluted. Thank you, Commander. As you were. The ghost saluted and dissipated into the air, and Colin proceeded on to the first stop on his rounds. Good morning, husband, Izaroa greeted him, raising her head from where she had been curled up on the largest treasure pile. Colin had been amused and rather surprised to find that of all the dragons here, she alone kept her hoard chamber in the classical or at least stereotypical draconic fashion, with actual piles of coins and jewels. Even that had the aspect of a front. There was nothing else of particular value displayed where it could be seen, and he knew that any dragon of her age possessed treasures whose worth dwarfed any amount of currency. Also, the disorderly heaps were neatly contained within specific sections of the room delineated by stone walls, and there were other areas comfortably furnished for human-sized activities. It seemed she just kept the traditional treasure piles because it pleased her. That, and she liked to sleep on them in her greater form. Good morning, wife, he replied with a warm smile. Morning, Venomax. HMF. The young dragon's disinterested grunt was, at least, not openly hostile. Venomax had his own alcove in Izaroa's apartments, complete with his own treasure pile. Colin suspected it consisted of what he had been able to gather in his own scant century of life. It was comparatively paltry both in size, and in the predominance of silver and bronze coins with only a scattering of gold and very few jewels. Still a fortune, but even by human standards a small one. This is an early visit, Izaroa observed. Shall I send Venomax out of the room? Ah, I only wish that was why I'd come, Colin said, grinning up at her. No, I have more work to do today. Amar Alafin was right about the need to move fast on outstanding business. I'll be leaving shortly, but I couldn't bear to be here and gone again without at least seeing you. Also, I brought you a little something. Oh, did you? She uncoiled herself, standing and stretching her wings. You've lost no time in acclimating yourself to the ways of dragons, Colin. I'm afraid it's no gift befitting a dragon. Shepherding Percy and Fanorexa didn't leave me with time to shop for proper souvenirs, but we did happen across an experience I wanted to share with you. Colin produced a meat skewer from his bag of holding, the tender mutton and crisp vegetables still steaming and fragrant after being kept in magical suspension all night. "Ah, you remembered my weakness for street food." Izaroa shifted and strode toward him in her smaller form, pausing to lean forward and nuzzle at his face momentarily as she accepted the skewer. "Here, Venomax, I brought you one as well." "What? You did? Why?" The dragon squinted suspiciously at him. "Would have been kind of rude not to, don't you think? Here." Colin held out a second skewer. After staring at him in apparent bemusement for a few moments, Venomax grunted and shifted his head forward, opening his jaws wide. "I am not going to toss it in there," Colin said patiently. "Come on, the point of street food is the flavor, the texture, the experience. I know you can barely taste in that form. This would just be an amount of nutrition too tiny to be worth swallowing." "Oh, you'd like to see me smaller and vulnerable, wouldn't you?" Venomax snarled, scrabbling to his feet. There were just so many responses to that, each more glib than the last, and most variations on the theme of how little Colin needed to make him vulnerable had his intentions been hostile. He voiced none of them. Colin had made some progress in befriending Venomax, but the prickly century-old adolescent was still grappling with the enormity of the sudden changes in his life. He would take more than a couple of weeks to really warm up. "All right," Colin said in a mild tone, tucking the skewer away again. "The bag'll keep it fresh essentially forever, so, whenever you feel comfortable enough. Izaroa, I also wanted to mention that Percy might come talk to you soon. I suggested it, anyway." "Oh." She had polished off her skewer rapidly, and now shifted her focus from the wry stare she'd been giving her son to a more serious one at Colin. "There was. Well, she had a bit of an incident in Shemavat. She's fine, but I think Percy may be a variant. I told her you knew quite a bit more about that and would be the person to ask." "Yes, she clearly is," Izaroa replied, nodding. "The signs were there from her earliest appearance here. I was planning to give her a few weeks to settle in before approaching her. People like Percy need some routine and familiarity to be comfortable, and her life has been nothing but upheaval lately." "Ah," he winced. "So I've stepped in it already." "You've done no harm, husband, don't worry," she assured him with an amused little smile. "I know you would not have pressured her. All this does is give Percy the initiative, something which has been taken from her, recently, so the opportunity will only do her good. She will approach me whenever she feels ready, then." Off to the side, Venomax had lowered his head and was staring glumly at the wall now. Izaroa didn't even have to shoot him any pointed looks. Colin couldn't take any pleasure in his discomfiture, but it was definitely for the best that he felt the weight of his actions. "Then, as always, it seems I can leave everything in your more than capable claws," Colin said, lifting one of those claws to lightly kiss her palm. Smiling, Izaroa leaned in to nuzzle him again. She didn't kiss him, out of consideration, even that close. The Masari spice on her breath was strong. "Good fortune on your quest, husband. I shall await your return with great anticipation." "He brings me snacks. All right, mother, I guess you can keep him." Tiavatharis didn't bother to stop munching on her meat skewer, simply reaching out to swat the back of Veidaralshi's head. Naturally, Veidaralshi ducked out of the way. Perhaps just as naturally, her mother deftly compensated, in fact seemed to have made her initial attack anticipating that move. Her claws connected, sending Veidaralshi staggering a couple of steps. "I think what impresses me most is neither of you choked, or dropped the food," Colin observed. "Please, what do you take us for?" Veidaralshi scoffed. "The greatest warrior alive and her incompetent reprobate offspring." "I am going to let you get away with that one, Pants," she said severely, pointing her already empty skewer stick at him, "because of how obviously I set you up for it, and I'm a big enough dragon to own my mistakes. Next time you may not be so lucky." "Child, you aren't a big enough dragon for anything," Tiavatharis informed her. I advise you to cease your quest for the limits of Colin's tolerance. We have already seen he does not lack spine. Gentle-natured people are exactly those you do not want to push too far. Oh, please, Pants isn't gonna lose his temper over some harmless joshing. The look Vedalshi gave him was more contemplative than he was accustomed to seeing on her. Frankly, I don't see him flipping his lid over anything I would actually be willing to do. I don't want to meet the asshole who could push him too far. Let's hope it's a while before you do, said Colin, and hopefully not today. I'll be counting on you, Vedalshi. Yeah, it's not every day you get to ride a new dragon, she said with a broad smirk. Already got tired of Phenorexa, huh? She still have trouble flying in a straight line? She certainly doesn't give me as much lip as you. Phenorexa doesn't know anything about the Harry, otherwise I might be bringing her instead. So far, the only real advantage you've displayed is that you can handle Masari pepper sauce better. Ooh, low blow. But don't worry, Pants, it's been a few decades, but the Harry are sociable little guys. I'll walk you through it, but making friends with them won't be hard for a people person like you. Suddenly, right there under her mother's ironic stare, Vedalshi sidled in closer, uncomfortably close. Her smirk was laden with a new layer of meaning Colin had not seen from her, nor expected to. And I can definitely promise you a smooth, satisfying ride, Colin. I'll be outside, just whistle when you're ready to go. Vedalshi stepped back, practically sliding off him, and let her warm stare linger on his own startled expression for a moment before she turned and sashayed all the way out of Tiavathyris's chamber, not bothering to shift into her larger form until she was outside. He had not realized she knew how to sway her hips like that. Okay, Colin said slowly. Yep. She won that round, all right. At some point does Vedalshi get used enough to a person to level off, or is it just gonna be constant escalation forever? He turned back to his wife, finding her regarding him steadily, without a smile. I advise you not to dismiss that as a joke, husband. 8, she couldn't have been serious. You were right there. She isn't. My sire's harem included my mother and one of my aunts, their mother, and 2 of my elder sisters by a different male. Such arrangements are normal for us, husband. They're normal for most species which pursue a harem breeding strategy, sapient or otherwise. Dragons have a degree of inherent protection against the effects of inbreeding. No dragon would mate with their own parent, offspring, or sibling. All else is on the table. Colin stared at her. But, wait. Don't tell me you approve of that. You would be a good choice of first mate for my daughter. In my personal opinion, it would be healthier for both she and you to cultivate an entirely different kind of relationship. If you two decide to pursue it, however, there will be no interference from me. But, it's just, she's a kid. Tiavathyris smiled faintly. She was a kid when your grandparents were born, Colin. Yes, and she's still one now. The family thing aside, and I don't even know where to start processing that, I can't make myself see Vedalshi as adult enough for that kind of thing. I mean, well, obviously I must seem somewhat immature from your perspective, but there's a fundamental, qualitative difference there. Or am I wrong? No. You are not. I agree, Colin. She sighed, shaking her head. You are a man who has lived a life, formed an identity through both hardship and blessing, built values and perspective, and carved out a place for yourself in the world. None of that can be said of not only my daughter, but any of the 3 Drakes living here. Maturity is the result of experiences, and the processing thereof. Even after a century of life, a person may still be in many respects a child if all they have done with that century is hunt mammoths, read books, and hide beneath their mother's wings. That's a relief, anyway, he said, frowning at the door through which Vedalshi had disappeared. I simply can't make myself see her that way. Which? Oh, this is going to become a problem, isn't it? A lesser one than you fear, I think, she said with a smile, stepping closer. Tiavatharis reached out to lightly stroke the back of his head once, a small gesture of affection, but more than he was accustomed to from her, and appreciated. Vedaral, she is not in love with you. Frankly, I don't think that is even a crush. I know my daughter, and in these antics I see youthful pride, not youthful lust. Very little is more important to dragons than our pride, husband. She is demanding your attention because she feels she has been denied it. How? We spar during your training sessions. It's not as if Vedaral she has tried to do anything else with me except play pranks and tell jokes. Pride, husband, is not always logical, not even often. You have invested comparatively much greater effort into your relationship with Phanorexa. Even Vanamax has received more of your direct focus, if only because he keeps creating disturbances you have to address. I assure you I don't have that kind of relationship with Phanorexa, either. I know, she said with a smile, petting his back again. But you value Phanorexa. You go to her for advice, and take her on adventures. I think relying on Vedaral to help you on this mission will do a great deal to cut off any drama at the knees. Just be sure to respect and rely on her skills, take her seriously and let her prove her merit. I do believe that's all she really wants. Any other complications which arise, husband, I trust in your ability to resolve. In the realm of social skills, you outmatch Vedaral considerably. She paused, then tilted her head slightly downward. Her tone did not become warning, exactly, but firmed subtly. In whatever way you judge it best to proceed, husband, be good to my daughter. You have my word I will go to great lengths to avoid hurting her. Frankly, I handle her more gently than you do. Sometimes we can't avoid emotional injuries, but we can work to soothe them when they happen. That's what a family does. Seeming satisfied with that, Tiavatharis nodded, and smiled. And in that realm, I do trust your skill. I have seen and benefited from it firsthand. Safety and success on your mission, then, husband. I will eagerly anticipate rejoining you, my lady wife. Cullen took her claw in his hand and kissed her palm, holding eye contact. Tiavatharis just regarded with a patient smile. Millimeters, you don't exactly care for courtly gestures such as this, do you? It is not bothersome, but it does not particularly do anything for me, no. Well, that's all right. I enjoy it, and let's not forget the all-important truth here. Still holding her claw, Cullen suddenly moved toward her, moved through the air, holding himself off the ground by will and magic in her draconic proximity. He surged up, wrapping his other arm around her waist to pull her close and looked down into her startled expression from above. You belong to me, he murmured heatedly, and I'll do with you as I please. That close, attuning as he was to every aspect of her being, he keenly sensed the warm, welcoming roar of her desire, but didn't even need to, with her face so near his own. He could plainly see the sudden dilation of her pupils, the startled parting of her lips, the dark flush that showed through even the deep bronze of her skin. Ah! She said breathlessly. You are a deviously fast learner, husband. We are going to explore so many frontiers together. But another day. Now, get out of here before I make you late. So that little tidbit of dragon trivia at least added some context for me, he said minutes later in the library. Is that why you got so heated up when I made a joke about you being my daughter? Well done, you figured it out, Phanorexa said condescendingly, looking down her long nose at him from her customary perch alongside the reference section. I have read far more about human sexuality than you have experienced, or will for some years yet, and in that, well, I foresaw that heading in a direction which does not do it for me. I do not have daddy issues, not in any way you would think of it. Granted, I loathed and feared my father, but we're dragons. That's normal. Right, well. Just to be clear, Phanorexa, and with no disrespect intended. I mean, it's not that you aren't pretty. Oh, you can stop, she said, grinning. I know, Colin. It's been long enough now. You've had plenty of opportunity to make a move on me, and it's quite plain the prospect never crossed your mind. So much the better. To be frank, if you did decide to claim me sexually, I think I would submit without a struggle. I confess I've been rather curious what you've been doing to Iziro that makes her yowl like that. I never thought anything could induce such a loss of composure in the old Wyram. But it's a passive sort of curiosity, not something I feel an actual need to satisfy. What we have established is comfortable, companionable. Let us not rock the boat. Firmly agreed, he said. Well, I'll be heading out shortly. Percy was still asleep last I checked, and I wasn't about to disturb her. Yesterday was a lot more emotions and more walking than she's used to. Can't I leave her in your care for the next few days? She's not a puppy, Phenorexa noted wryly. Percy seems admirably able to look after herself. Yes, but she is about to be the only human in this place, and it's not as if she's friends with any of the rest of the family. It'd be awfully lonely by herself all the time. Besides, she actually will need some help. It was too late to set up her house when we got back last night, remember? I left all the furniture we bought in the middle of the chamber, including her books and telescopes. The other stuff she considered sensitive is in a trunk by the side door to her house. She'll need a strong pair of claws to help set everything up. Just leave Atraximos's old junk out in the middle when you remove it, and I'll put it away in the vaults when I get back. HMPH. Very well. Phenorexa lifted her nose, putting on an exaggeratedly off-handed tone. I suppose it wouldn't hurt to spend some time with her. I do enjoy Percy's company, after all. You're a kind soul, Phenorexa, he said gravely. Please also let her know that I put all the prepared meals from our trip in the food box. There's also plenty of fruit and bread, plus butter and jam, so she should have plenty to eat, and might actually be happier not having to rely on what passes for my cooking. And I set aside a meat skewer for you, it's on the top shelf at the front. I knew you'd just snap at me if I brought it into the library. Correct, and rightly so. Also, Colin, did you forget I was there in Shemavat? I've already sampled all the food. Yes, but I gave meat skewers to everyone else in the family, and I'm not about to come home to you pitching a fit about being left out. Now if you'll excuse me, I need to check in with your mother, and then I'm off. Imar Alafine was disdainful of street food, Misari or otherwise, but that proved no great problem. Colin had other means of making her feel special. When the two of them emerged directly from her chamber into the central vault, she was in her smaller form, wearing a haughty expression, nose high in the air and lips pinched in disapproval. She was still also flushed pink, her snowy hair slightly disheveled and her customary blue gown slipping off one shoulder. Colin still hadn't succeeded in getting it off her entirely, not that there was time today anyhow, but that was fine. An enjoyable journey was only lessened if rushed. Vedaralshi was full-sized and waiting for him. She looked at Imar Alafine and grinned, and for just a moment Colin thought things were about to become very uncomfortable, but for once the Green Drake chose not to create an unnecessary problem. Finally. What, you had to go around and say goodbye to everyone individually, including the ghosts? Yes, Vedaralshi, that is precisely what I did. I am so terribly sorry to make you late, I know how many pressing appointments you have. I'm a busy girl, Pants. Places to see, people to do. I would advise you to follow the brat's nose at first, said Imar Alafine, still outwardly dignified. There are a few sites sacred to Hiyamat in the plains, and given your previous interaction with her she would likely not take offense if you approached directly. However, there is a certain pageantry that is commonly accepted among the gods, and our goal is after all to avoid an adversarial relationship. It will be safest to do the standard thing and approach one of the hairy groups first, and have whatever passes for their priesthood make an introduction. I can't imagine they would deny you. Vedaralshi knows. Well, she used to know several of them. Ha! She knew their grandparents, maybe. Venomax had emerged into the chamber, looking performatively disdainful. "Max is as usual being a butthead, but he's not completely without a point for once," said Vedarelshi. "It's very unlikely I still have any living friends out there. It's probably fine, the Harry are very easygoing folks. Shouldn't be too hard to make introductions once we find some. I know some places they have permanent encampments, but nearly all of them live in nomadic groups, so we might meet those first." "Oh, yes, I'm sure they won't be at all terrified by the sight of a dragon descending on them," Venomax scoffed. Colin noted with amusement that he had surreptitiously crept closer. "I'm almost sorry I'll miss that." "If there is one thing I trust Arkansas Colin to manage to do," said Imar Alafine, "it is befriend a group of pre-agricultural tribals even while they are cowering in terror from a dragon. It's not as if she's much of a dragon, anyway." "That's true enough," Venomax agreed, smirking at his sister. She just tilted her head, watching him with mild curiosity. Colin glanced quickly back and forth at each of them, reading between the lines, remembering some things he'd seen and been told recently, and had a sudden idea. Maybe there was a way to kill two birds with one stone, here. "Hey, Venomax," he said lightly, "would you like to come along?" "Huh. Well, I suppose it would be best if someone was there to keep an eye on you two. I can only imagine what a mess your last trip turned into, between Fenorexa and that girl." Vedarelshi rolled her eyes so hard her entire head lifted. "Yes, this should make it all go much more smoothly," Imar Alafine sighed. "I hope you know what you are doing, husband. Good fortune on your quest. Please refrain from making us any more divine enemies." "I vow I shall come back alive or perish in the attempt, my lady love," he said solemnly, then concentrated and flashed across the space to Vedarelshi, landing astride her neck. "Whoa! Hey!" She spun in a full circle in startlement. "A little warning. Hells, buy a girl dinner first." Yeah. Come on, Venomax. Let's get this circus on the road." Toad continued,